Welcome to dentReviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing the new Etymotic earphones, the ER4XR and the ER4SR. One is an extended response earphone, which adds a little bit more of a bass boost to an already excellent earphone. The other is the studio response, which is giving it more of a flat, neutral studio monitor response. These are very, very brief impressions that I've put together over the last few days, just listening to both of these and comparing them to the original ER4S earphone. So take these with a grain of salt because they may change over time. As I listen to them more and I become more familiar with them, I might tend to like one over the other. But needless to say, these are probably the three highest quality, most reference earphones that I've ever heard in my life, and I would highly recommend any of them to anyone that wants a very revealing, studio-like sound with a great isolation, great build quality, and just a superb earphone. So, what we have here is the new ER4XR, and this model is the extended response, so this is the one with the extra bass. You can see here compared to the original ER4S model, they're very, very similar in design. The barrels are about the same dimensions, pretty close anyway. They might be slightly thicker, it's hard to tell. The pieces that come off of the earphone at the sort of 45-degree angle are kind of redesigned. There was a model between these two, the current version of the ER4S, where they had changed to an all-black style instead of the red and blue coloring. And the cable was a little bit different. It had more braided cable like this than the old one, which is more straight cable. I like the old cable. It feels really, really durable. Some people complain that it has a lot of cable noise or microphonics. I never have an issue with it personally. I mean, I'll be completely honest. At first, it bugged me, but I started to use the shirt clip, and I will show you later how I do that. And I've just never even thought of it again. I've never had any problem with it. So I think it might be partly how I wear it and partly what you're going to do with the earphones. If you're going to work out and exercise, the extra movement might rub it more and might cause more noise. So it may become an issue, or maybe I'm just more tolerant of it. I'm not sure. Nonetheless, the new earphones, to me, don't seem much different. I mean, if you touch them, they will transmit noise into the earphone. But overall, they're very similar, and they also include a shirt clip. Just to show you, the centerpiece of the cable on the older style versus the new style is pretty similar in design. It's just where the Y splits, it combines into this piece. This is a resistor in the old ER4S, which changes the character of the sound on this model. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this is merely for looks now, which is kind of cool, but they did make it a little bit more streamlined. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner, and even though it's covered up by the clip, it has the Etymotic logo there. So that's kind of cool if you want to have a branded section to the earphone. They kind of threw that in there. You can see that the cable of the earpieces is a little bit thinner. Even if you broke apart the braid, it's thinner. I don't know if I can kind of unwind this here. You can see that if you can see that with the camera, it's a little bit thinner, and I'm not sure if that's going to hold up as well over time. It doesn't feel cheap. It feels nice. Into the housing is also a little bit different. The stress relief here, you can see it's kind of part of that molded blue piece. This one here doesn't seem to have as much stress relief. I mean, this is a little bit flexible here, but not as flexible as this is left to right anyway. And I'd say it's probably similar, except again the fact that the cable is a little bit thinner. But time will tell if this bends here and gets yanked on versus this. This just to me feels a little bit more robust. This feels like it's a little bit more likely to wear out the cable. And that's probably my number one complaint, or I should say concern, about the earphone is the cable. While in one way it's a gorgeous cable and it's much nicer than the old model, I personally am just concerned about the durability of it. I've had the ER4S for a while now, and it has held up to me, not abusing it, but I feel like I don't have to baby it like I do some earphones. This one, at least so far, I'm more babying it because I'm just concerned about that cable. But we'll see. One thing they did add, which I absolutely love, is a cord lock. This here will keep the cables together up to the earpieces. That's great when you're wearing them to keep the extra slack kind of taut on your neck. I think sometimes you could use that if you're careful to help it wear around the ears, because if you put them behind your ears, this can kind of cinch up against your neck to keep them a little bit taut, and also can help with preventing a little bit of noise in the cable if you set that up right. See, I had actually added one to my ER4S. I've done this with all my ER4S and other earphones that have no cord lock. I just took a piece of note card, wrapped it a few times around, and taped it, and I mean, it works incredibly well. It doesn't slide down when you pull the cables apart, but it slides easy enough that it's fairly loose. So I highly recommend modding your cables if you don't have a cord lock like that. The clip on the cable is a little bit sturdier on the older model. It's loose on the older model, which, to be honest, I don't really like that. I never really did like that. This one's a little bit more stiff. It doesn't spin on its own. You have to kind of push it, which I kind of like that. However, if you look at these and compare them side by side, the old cable, it may not look substantial in person, and maybe not the clip so much, although it does feel a little bit sturdier. The spring inside, you probably can't see that too easily, is not as heavy duty. It's a little bit softer, smaller of a spring. The clip material itself doesn't feel as strong of a plastic, and then the clip itself, I can barely pull this off of the ER4S to show you, but if you look at that, see, that came off easier, which is kind of nice. But the plastic piece of the clip is noticeably thinner. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's just a lot beefier on the old model. I don't think that's necessarily a problem if you're careful with it, and I'm sure this is user replaceable pretty easily from them. They'll probably send you another one. But this just feels a little bit more robust, and I think it would last longer if I had to guess. It has a little grip for your finger too, which is nice, although not completely necessary. This is more than ergonomic enough. Also, the teeth on the old one, if I'm not mistaken, are a little bit more indented, so that you can see that if you wanted to count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 teeth on that, and there are only 1, 2.5 teeth on this. So this might give you a little bit more traction onto clothing. I'm not really sure. In reality, using the clip so far, it hasn't been any different. If anything, this is just lighter and smaller. So you have a little bit lighter, more convenient, versus a little bit more durable. You can see the connector here is pretty similar on the models. I'd say the old model still feels a little bit beefier. At least it feels like it's a little bit more rigid plastic. The new model feels very, very good, but feels a little bit softer, especially in the cord relief here. This part's not too bad here, and on this one it just feels a lot softer. Again, I'm not sure if that's going to result in a less durable cable, or if that's actually a good amount of softness to resist bending. We'll find out over time. The plug itself, though, if you can see that, is much improved on the new model, because this section here is thick and doesn't fit into a lot of phone cases and MP3 cases. The equivalent section here is much more narrow. As a matter of fact, the overall size of this outer piece of black plastic is about the size of the gold circular part inside of this molded plastic here. So they really shrunk that down nice. It fits a lot more cases, a lot more convenient in that way. Last but not least, the bottom cord of the old cable has a nice coating, and if you look really carefully, you can almost see that I think it's braided underneath this coating here, or at least wound. The new model is a lot more supple. It's just more flexible. You can twist it and bend it a lot easier. This one's a little bit more stiff. I'm literally trying to spin that the same amount. I'm not joking. So it spins, but it's a lot tougher. This one's just like flexible. I think that's a huge improvement. It's also less shiny, which I think makes it look a little bit nicer. It's like more of a soft matte. So overall, I'd say the new cable is an improvement in every way except possibly durability. It's got a nice touch, nice feel. It's flexible, makes it easier to wrap up and store. It fits more cases. It looks great. It's got just a great design, but will it hold up over time? I'm not sure. So that's the cable. And then last but not least of the cable, I guess, I lied, there's more, is that the connector where it connects to the earphone module is supposedly removable. I've yet to remove it. I don't want to break it because I am very cautious, but I'm not really sure what to grab to pull this out of this earphone. But it's supposed to, oh, I got it, yay. It's supposed to pull straight back. It has a little pin on the bottom, like a notched key, I guess you'd call it, to lock it in place. Otherwise, I think it's a pretty standard type of, I forget the terminology, MMCXI or something like that, cable removable connector. They just added that key to keep it a little bit more stable. And I think that'll probably give it more of a longevity, and connectivity will be a little bit more stable there. But you can see that's a very nice solid design. It's very flush. There's no loose components in there. It's built right into the tolerances of the body really well. It looks like a nice cable. Let's see how well it goes back in. So if we just line up the notch here and we push in, that snapped in very easily. I have noticed if I'm putting this in my ear and I'm spinning the earphone to kind of gently push it further in the ear, I do feel a little bit of wiggle there. Nothing severe, nothing bad, and I've never had it come out of the earphone body, but it's something to notice. I never had that in the other model, but if you look, I don't know if you probably can't see that, but it wiggles a little bit. Nothing bad. And then the nozzle of the earphone is pretty much identical to the old ER4S. I don't have any kind of way to measure this with incredible tolerances, but I don't know if you can see that well. The nozzles themselves look like they're about the same length. The new one might be infinitesimally longer this way, and might be a little bit thinner even. It's really hard to tell, but they fit the same foam tip. If you put this foam tip on the earphone here, this is the same exact foam tip series. They fit on both earphones and they feel identical, so I'm pretty sure it'll fit most tips the same. One thing I do like about the old model is the color coding. Even in extremely low light, I mean like really low light, if I look carefully, I can usually tell which one is red or blue on these, so I can easily identify which model is the right and which one is the left. I also took my super glue and added a little bump here so I could feel that there was extra piece, just a little bit thicker on that side than the bump on this one, so that I could feel which one was one side. So that's how I used to do it. On this one, they wrote L and R on the earpieces themselves, which is kind of nice, but it's a little bit harder to easily tell just looking at them, especially in low light. What I found that I can do is I can take either one of them and just use my fingernail and scratch it, and if I scratch the other side, I feel the letter. Well, now I know that because the letter is on this side, that's the right ear, because the letter is always towards the back of your head. So again, on this one, if I scratch, I feel nothing. Then I feel the L, or whatever letter it might be, if I can't see it in the dark, and I know that that's the back, so that must be the left ear. So it's a little bit more delicate of a procedure, but you can find which one is which ear without looking at them at all, which is a little nice. But I'm probably going to, if I keep these, use the super glue method again, as it makes it a little bit easier. So that's the ER4 overview of the cable and the body design. But what about the sound? Well, there's three models here: the ER4S, the ER4SR, and the ER4XR. If I use the ER4S as a reference, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, similar to the ER4P, only a little bit better treble and a little bit more linear bass. If that is our reference, the ER4SR, which is very similar, almost if not identical to the XR in body design, except the fact that it has the model written as the SR on the body. Studio reference, it says. The primary difference between the two is that this has an extended bass boost, and it's an incredibly smooth response, but what they did is they shifted the bass end up a little bit for people who complained over the years that the ER4S was awesome, but it just was not bassy enough, or it just lacked enough body, too thin, whatever. I'm going to start with the ER4SR though. And again, remember, these are my first initial impressions, and these may change, but nonetheless, the ER4SR is probably, I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say, my favorite all-time earphone, the best thing I've ever heard in my ears. They're just phenomenal, and I want to get geeky here and probably start drawing some graphs. But the ER4SR, if you were to compare it, I'm going to show you real quick what I consider the ER4S to be. So if this is a graph of the low to high frequency, and I'm just going to kind of generalize this, but you have low, mids, and high. The ER4S, typically speaking, is very linear throughout the spectrum. However, On the very, very low end, I'd say it's a little bit recessed, like the sub bass, so that's probably, I'm going to say like 50 hertz. And then it's fairly linear all the way throughout, and then at about 3 kilohertz, there's a little bump, maybe 2 to 3 kilohertz, somewhere in there. And then at about 7.5 kilohertz, there's a small dip. And then it's a little bit uneven in the super high treble, but overall you can see that's very, very, very flat in general. Now if you were to compare that to the ER4SR, and again, keep in mind this is just a general simplified graph, I would say the bass response is pretty similar. It gives the impression that the bass might be a little bit more in the general bass region. And I almost want to say that it gives the impression that the upper mids are maybe a little bit lower, so that 3 kilohertz hump is, I'd say, almost gone. It sounds like that section is perfect to me. I'm not really sure what I'm hearing. There might be a little bit of a boost in the like 5 to 7 kilohertz region. And then again, the upper end is a little bit uneven, but it starts to get to the point where at that high up, you're not really hearing the differences in response as much as you do down here. It's just you become less sensitive up there. But I would say that the 10 kilohertz region to my ears sounds a bit improved over the ER4S. And then up here in like I'm going to say the 10 kilohertz area, maybe somewhere up there, I feel like it's a little bit more raised than the ER4S. So what you end up hearing is no honkiness in that 3K area, none of that horn effect that you hear in the old ER4S if you're sensitive to that. And then you hear a little bit more, I don't want to say sibilance because I don't think they're sibilant headphones, but it reveals things like that more. And then up here on the top, I get the impression that there's a little bit more air in the music, so that you hear things like tape noise and hiss a little bit better, not because it's boosted, but I just think it's a little bit more referenced than the ER4S. So this might be kind of an unfair graph here. This might just be a perfectly straight line, whereas this is more up and down. I'm not sure, but the impression I get overall is that this is slightly more, I guess you could call it U-shaped, but in reality it's probably more linear than the ER4S, which causes it to sound like that in comparison. The ER4XR, XR, I would describe that as being identical, as far as I could tell, nearly identical to the ER4SR, but about 1,000 hertz, it starts to just gradually slope into the bass here, and then it kind of levels off. Now, this might be an exaggeration in terms of the overall graphing, but really it just sounds like a phenomenally flat and smooth curve that you get into the bass region. So there doesn't sound like a lot of bass bloat exists. But there is a little bit of masking in the treble, because relative to the treble you are getting a little bit meatier, weightier response. So I would say that for the people that really want that dynamic transient and they really want that spacious, transparent sound, this is it right here, people. The ER4SR is the way to go. So if you still feel like the ER4S is lacking that really nice low-end weight or body to the presentation that gives it a real sense of mass, then I think the XR is the way to go. It's going to be practically like an SR, but with perfect bass. I'm sort of in between. I really ideally wish that they would take the SR response and just boost it at the 50 to 100 hertz region, similar to where they did here, but just kind of drop it down lower in the mid bass area. That would just be, it would probably be the most perfect studio monitor I've ever heard in my ears, and more than it already is. So that's my preferred response, but hopefully that gives you a general idea of what I'm hearing. Now, if you really wanted to say the SR wasn't bassy enough, get the XR. I think you'll love it. I think you're going to find that it's just the right amount of added bass. If you think the SR or the ER4S are perfect overall and they sound great, but they just lack the slightest bit of bass, then you may be like me and you may really be hearing that sub bass to low bass region, which the ER4XR is going to boost probably a little bit more than you're liking, but it's really a matter of opinion. It's going to be very subjective. So I would highly recommend purchasing them both, comparing them, kind of give them a little bit of chance of what you like, and see what you prefer. So just to give you some musical examples, and I've mentioned this on the forums if you've read any of the posts I've made, but I was listening to some Steely Dan music, and the ER4XR sounded phenomenal. I mean, it sounded like the bass was just the right amount of meat and weight, and it hit nicely with each bass impact. The toms and things sounded great, and it had just enough of that clarity to really bring out the transients and to bring out the dynamic instruments that kind of jump out at you in the stereo field. Now, I would say Steely Dan is a phenomenal mastering engineer, however, or Donald Fagen or whoever was part of that. But the issue is that album, relatively speaking, compared to most music, is a little bit lighter in the mid bass. It's a very, I'd almost call them a lean sound, the Steely Dan albums. They have a very hi-fi crispness to them. So adding that XR bass weight does a very good balance of giving you bass without ruining the transients. However, on some other music, such as some orchestral and more new age music, I found that if the instrumentation was light and there were few instruments, like one or two main focused instruments, like a piano, a violin, or a guitar, that extra bass really gave it a good sense of realism in the body of the instrument. However, when you started to add other instruments like strings and oboes and flutes and violins and pianos all together, I really got the sense that it was a little bit too much, and that the mid bass and that bass on the XR model were probably a little bit too masking of the other areas of the spectrum. I feel like the SR in that regard brings out all the details more without really sacrificing bass. I think if you are really familiar with the Etymotic earphones, the SR probably give the best bass to date. Even though the XR is phenomenal, the SR still has incredibly neutral bass, and if you like the ER4S, you're going to like the ER4SR even better in terms of bass, because it really does give you a slight impression of an improved bass. And in my opinion, if I had to choose one, it would probably be the SR. It only improves upon the ER4S. The only thing I could say about the S that could be perceived as possibly being better in one regard is that they're very smooth. And what I mean by smooth is no one frequency really stands out above another, which is a great sign of a studio reference response. But they're also a little bit boosted in the 2 to 3 kilohertz area, and what that does is it adds a little bit of coolness or coldness to the sound. So it sounds like, the sound has an icy smoothness to it, where it just kind of blends from mid to high. These completely have a transparent blend between low and high, but they almost sound a little bit more dry, or I hate to say this word in a negative way, but more hollow in that region. Not that they're lacking anything, but it's almost as if you're hearing through it instead of seeing the glossy glaze over it. And that may be a bad way to describe it, but I feel like the more I'm listening to them, the more I feel like these are transparent, and these might be slightly colored in that regard. But nonetheless, that gives orchestral strings and pads and things like that an incredibly smooth and pleasing sound on the ER4S. It still has that incredibly pleasing sound on the SR, but maybe not in the same way. It has that because it's neutral and because it's representing it the way it should be, but it doesn't have it in the sense that it adds an extra gloss, an extra gleam or shine over it. It's just the way it sounds is the way you hear it with these. The biggest improvement over the ER4S that the SR brings to the table is that it gives a little bit more crisp details in the high frequencies. I'm not going to go and say exactly where, but I'm feeling that it's between like 8 to 10 kilohertz or higher, probably higher. And what it does is it gives the impression of more dynamic sound. It gives a sharper, clearer attack to instruments. You hear fingers sliding on a guitar with more dry detail. You hear breaths in a voice with more rasp. You hear gritty electric guitars with more grit. You hear bass lines with a little bit more bass string attack, so that the bass comes off as sounding a little bit more pronounced. It really just gives everything a very crisp, spacious, and kind of jumping out at you sense of treble, whereas the ER4S is just a little bit more laid back and smooth, which a lot of people would laugh that I call them laid back and smooth treble compared to most earphones, because a lot of people consider them to be bright earphones. But if you're getting a proper deep seal, and I mean a good deep seal with great sound isolation and a decent depth, you're going to be getting a much better response than someone who might just put these in the ear like a normal earphone and expect them to sound good. But you're going to get peaks and resonance issues, and you really want to make sure these are fit properly, and I'll go into that in another video. So I'm going to stop in a second here. I don't want this to go too long, but too late. But I would say that's the biggest improvement with the SR, is the clarity and the resolution. I really feel like you hear more detail in background vocals and background instruments that the ER4S portrays if you listen for it, but on these they jump out at you a little bit more, and not in an artificial way, but it just sounds like the ER4S has a slight milky veil that's removed and kind of cleared off in the treble that these reveal, and it makes things just sound incredibly transparent and incredibly clear and vivid and very dynamic and detailed and sharp and all those things without ever being harsh or ever being artificially boosted in the sound. So if I had to choose one again, I'd choose the SR. If I had to choose between the ER4S and the ER4XR, that would be a really tough call, because the ER4XR adds that similar treble improvement that the SR has, but the ER4S is incredibly smooth while having just that neutral bass, which may not be perfect, but it's probably more close to reference than the XR. But that would be a really tough choice. I'm not going to lie. I might lean towards the XR because of that overall clarity while also having a little bit more bass at the cost of that reference quality, whereas the SR just kind of nails everything. It could have a little bit more sub bass, but I don't feel like it's missing. I don't feel like I'm lacking anything with these. They just sound phenomenal. So I highly recommend you check them out. Get whichever one suits your taste for bass, and I think you'll be incredibly happy. For the price, I have purchased headphones that are $1,000, and these trump them in every single way. I've compared the ER4S to the UERM Ultimate Ears, and I would pick the ER4S easily, although the UERM were great in their own regard, but I'd still pick the ER4S. And I just highly recommend the SR and the XR if you don't already have an Etymotic earphone. And if you do, I still would think they're a pretty good upgrade. Some people might not want to spend $350 for a minor upgrade, but even though it's a minor improvement, that minor upgrade can have a pretty significant change in the way you experience the earphone, at least for me. So I would highly recommend them. And then last but not least, I just want to show you that these come with a little bit of accessories here. They come with some small frosted tips, the medium gray foam tips, and these newer, they're probably similar in overall shape and design, but they're a little bit different, like plastic, and they're clear. These are the large triple flange tips. It comes with a little instruction manual that just kind of goes over the accessories, how to fit everything, and how to use everything, changing filters. The criticality of the seal and depth of the inner ear earphones and what that does to the sound. Then they come with a filter changing tool and a couple green filters, 2 pairs I think. Comes with a 1/4-inch adapter for hi-fi stereo equipment and whatnot. And what else do they come with? The shirt clip, which I have attached, and that's it. So you get a couple tips, adapter, filter tool and filters, shirt clip. Oh, and then of course the case. This is a pretty nice case. It's a little bit of a departure from their old case. It's kind of a combination. The old case they had was a large plastic case with a foam insert that had cutouts, which was nice for permanent storage, but not very convenient for portable usage. Then they have a little small Etymotic pouch, which is just kind of like pocket size, which is great. It wasn't very rigid though. It was kind of soft, and it wasn't very big, so it just barely fit everything in there. This is kind of an in-between. It's semi-rigid. It flexes, but it holds its shape pretty well. It's larger than the small case, but smaller than the big case. It has an awesome array of pockets. They go all the way to the bottom on the left and all the way to the bottom on the right for each pocket. So you can have your tips in one, your accessories in the other, your earphones in here, and then some papers or an MP3 player on the other side. So if you don't mind carrying a case that's a little bit larger and you want to keep everything together, I think it's excellent. However, I'm sort of a minimalist, and I probably don't need anything but my earphones, maybe some filters and some extra tips. ear tips to use. So I've carried my ER4S in this for a long time. See, you can see I have the couple changes of tips, some compli foam, some Etymotic tips, filters, a tool, adapter, and it's all in this little case that clips, and I put the headphones right on top, and I can actually put my MP3 player in here as well. I have a little Sansa player, although I also have a higher quality Sony high-res player, but I'll go into a review of that later. But one thing I highly recommend as well, and I put paper in here just to keep the banging around and scratching to a minimum, but Altoids tins are incredible headphone cases. You can just take these, and what I normally do is slide the cord lock close to the top. I put the foam of the tips close to my pinky, and what I do that for is so that as I wrap it on my hands, it ends up being that there's enough slack here on the edge of the adapter in the middle there. As you wrap this around, it makes a very nice loop, and then you can place this into the tin and then place the foam tips gently in the center, and there's no stress on any part of the cable. The clip is light. You lay that down, shut it, and you have a very nice, it doesn't shake or rattle because of the piece of paper, and it's very easy to just fold that paper up, take them out, so there's nothing special required. It works really well, fits in a pocket, fits in a bag, is awesome, highly recommend it. I do the same with the ER4S. They're a little bit tighter because of the bulkier clip and resistor, but they work pretty much the same. You're not going to fit very many tips, so sometimes I'll take another Altoids tin, and that'll be the one I put all my accessories in. So I go back and forth on my carrying method, but that is the overall summary. Way too long probably, but I hope you enjoyed it, of the ER4S, ER4XR, and SR. And I couldn't recommend them enough. Etymotic is a superb company with fantastic customer support. They constantly go above and beyond in terms of providing help, sending accessories and parts, answering questions. Their engineers on the forum answering questions. I mean, they just do above and beyond. Their products, for what they are, I don't care what anyone says, whether they've gone up or down, are incredibly reasonably priced. $350 gets you a good case, a great headphone, some accessories, an extra pair of filters, filter changing tool, and all of that with the greatest sound quality, studio response, in an earphone. You could spend $50 to $150 and get a great earphone, but it's not going to be as good as these. You could spend $600 and get a great earphone, but it's not going to be as good as these. So really, for what you're paying, you're getting a superb value, in my opinion. Either way you go. I might end up keeping both. I'm a paranoid guy. I'm crazy. I'll never know if I want the bass or not, and they're just so good, I don't know if I can let go of one of them. I highly recommend checking them out. If you have any comments or questions, leave them below. Thank you for watching. Check out the forums and check out more reviews. I'm going to have a fit video where I show you how to get the best fit out of these earphones. Get them nice and deep and sealed well with different tips. I'll kind of go through that and show you some close-ups. And I'll give you a more in-depth review after I listen to them more about the sound and the quality, and give you some song comparisons. So again, thanks for watching, and if you made it this far, you rock, and I'll be back. Thanks.